I used to believe love was something you protected quietly. Like a candle in a storm. You cupped it with both hands, leaned close, and hoped the wind would pass. For 5 years, I protected him that way. I protected us, until the day he cheated and walked away, as if our past were a coat he could shrug off. His name was Evan. We met when life was simple and future. Plans were sketched on napkins. We built routines, Sunday groceries, late-night movies. The same coffee shop where the barista knew our order. I believed in the ordinary beauty of that life. I believed in loyalty. The first crack came quietly. A notification lit his phone while he showered. I didn't mean to look. I wasn't suspicious. I was human. A name I didn't recognize. A heart emoji. Then another message, unmistakable in its intimacy. My chest tightened, but I told myself there must be an explanation. There always is, until there isn't. That night, Evan sat across from me at the kitchen table, scrolling as if nothing in the world had shifted. The yellow light above us hummed. I asked him calmly. He sighed, annoyed, like I'd interrupted a thought. It's not what you think, he said. It was exactly what I thought. He confessed with a strange relief, as if honesty were a burden he was glad to drop at my feet. He spoke about feeling stuck, about wanting something new. He spoke in the language of excuses, not remorse. And then he said the sentence that still echoes in my head. I think we should take a break. A break. From 5 years, from promises, from me. By morning he was gone. Not dramatically. No slammed doors. Just a note on the counter and an empty closet. He blocked me on social media within hours. Our shared photos disappeared. It was as if he'd erased us to make room for her. I didn't cry that day. Shock is efficient like that. The days that followed were quieter than grief usually is. I went to work. I smiled when required. I slept in the center of the bed. Friends told me I deserved better. Strangers told me time would heal. None of it reached the place where the betrayal lived. Then unexpectedly, his mother called. Marianne had always been kind to me, warm, perceptive. The kind of woman who listened more than she spoke. During holidays, she'd squeeze my hand and say, "Your family." I hadn't heard from her since Evan left. When her name appeared on my phone, my heart stuttered. "Can we meet?" she asked gently. "I owe you an apology." We met at a quiet cafe near the river. Winter light spilled through the windows, pale and forgiving. Marianne looked tired, older somehow, but her eyes were steady. "I know what my son did," she said without preamble, "and I won't defend it." I stared at my coffee, unsure what to say. She reached across the table, resting her hand over mine. "You loved him honestly," she continued. "You gave him years he didn't deserve, and I won't pretend this doesn't shame me." I finally looked up. "Why are you telling me this?" She inhaled, slow and deliberate. "Because I don't choose his mistakes. And because what he did, it doesn't end here." There was something resolute in her voice. Something I hadn't heard since the betrayal. Not anger, purpose. "He thinks he can rewrite the past," Marianne said. "But some choices come with consequences." I didn't understand what she meant yet. I only knew that, for the first time since Evan left, I felt seen, not as the woman who was abandoned, but as someone whose story wasn't over. Outside, the river moved steadily forward. Inside, something in me did too. I had no idea then how deeply Marianne would step into my life, or how unexpectedly she would choose me over her own son. But this was the beginning. Chapter 2. The choice that changed everything. The day Elena walked away from Marcus was the day silence moved into his life and made itself comfortable. For weeks after the breakup, Marcus lived on autopilot. He went to work, smiled when required, nodded during conversations, and returned home to an apartment that still smelled faintly of Elena's lavender shampoo. At night, sleep refused to come. When it did, it brought dreams of unfinished sentences and unanswered questions. Elena hadn't just left him. She had chosen someone else, someone easier, wealthier, more impressive on paper. Her final words echoed like a quiet verdict. "You deserve better than waiting on potential." Marcus had believed in her when no one else did. He had paid her tuition when her scholarships fell through. He had worked double shifts so she could chase dreams without worrying about rent. And still, she walked away, hand in hand with a man who arrived only when success was guaranteed. What hurt the most wasn't the betrayal. It was how easy it had been for her to leave. A week later, Marcus received a message he didn't expect. From Mrs. Hale, Elena's mother. "Marcus, I know this may be inappropriate, but could we talk? Just once. Marcus stared at the screen for a long time. Mrs. Hale had always been kind to him, but he assumed her loyalty would naturally follow her daughter. Still, something in the wording felt heavy, urgent. They met at a small cafe Elena used to love. Mrs. Hale looked older than Marcus. Remembered. Tired. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrapped them around her cup. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. Marcus shook his head. "You don't owe me anything." "Yes, I do," she replied firmly. "Because I stayed silent while my son destroyed something real." Marcus looked up. "Your son?" Her jaw tightened. "Elena didn't leave you because she stopped loving you. She left because my son convinced her she was settling. He fed her fear. He made her ashamed of the man who stood by her." The truth landed hard, but it made everything make sense. "I warned him," Mrs. Hale continued. "I told him he was repeating his father's mistakes, using people, discarding them when convenient. He didn't listen." Marcus said nothing. Anger burned quietly in his chest, but beneath it was something else, clarity. "I won't ask you to forgive," she said, "but I will tell you this. You were the best thing that ever happened to my daughter. And one day, she will realize what she lost." Marcus finally spoke. "Why are you telling me this?" Mrs. Hale met his eyes, something resolute settling into her expression. "Because I'm done protecting him, and because the truth deserves a witness." As Marcus left the cafe, the world felt different, not lighter, but sharper. He wasn't weak. He wasn't abandoned because he lacked value. He had been left behind by people who feared becoming small next to him. That night, Marcus made a decision, not out of revenge, but self-respect. He stopped waiting, stopped explaining, stopped hoping she would come back. If Elena ever returned, it would not be to save him. It would be to face the man she walked away from, and the life she could never reclaim. Chapter 3. The Choice That Changed Everything. By the time winter arrived, the truth had fully settled into my bones. He hadn't just cheated, he had erased us. The house we once planned to fill with laughter felt hollow, like a stage after the curtains had fallen. I stopped checking my phone for his messages. I stopped waiting. Then his mother called. Her voice was steady, almost formal, but beneath it was something trembling. She asked if we could meet, not at her home, our old home, but at a small cafe by the river, where she used to take me when I was younger. When she said, I felt like the daughter she never had. When I arrived, she was already there. Hands wrapped around a cup she wasn't drinking. She didn't waste time. "I know everything," she said, "and I won't defend him." I felt the old ache rise, sharp and familiar, but I didn't interrupt. "He abandoned more than you," she continued. "He abandoned his values, his responsibility, and I won't pretend that's acceptable." Her words landed heavier than any apology he could have offered. She slid an envelope across the table. Inside were documents, property papers, business shares, legal authorizations. My name was written clearly, deliberately. "I'm choosing you," she said quietly. "Not out of revenge, out of truth." I stared at the papers, disbelief tightening my chest. This wasn't just support. It was a public, irreversible choice. She was cutting him off. "Standing with me?" "Why?" I finally asked. "Because you stayed loyal to yourself," she said. "And because I refused to reward betrayal." For the first time since everything shattered, I felt something other than grief. Not joy, clarity, the kind that comes when the past loosens its grip. As we left the cafe, cameras flashed across the street. Someone had recognized her. By morning, the story would spread. He cheated. She was abandoned, and his own mother stood against him. I walked home alone, but I wasn't lonely anymore. I was standing at the beginning of a different life, one I hadn't planned, but one I was finally ready to claim. And somewhere deep inside I knew. This was the moment everything turned. Chapter 4. The Choice That Changed Everything. The rain fell harder that evening, tapping against the windows like impatient fingers. I stood in the hallway outside Mrs. Harrington's study, my heart pounding as if it already knew the weight of what was about to be said. Inside, Daniel was arguing. "You can't be serious, Mom," he snapped. "You don't know the whole story." Mrs. Harrington's voice was calm but sharp in a way that cut deeper than anger. "I know enough. I know you lied. I know you walked away when things became inconvenient. And I know who stayed." The door opened. Daniel's eyes met mine, and for the first time, There was no arrogance left in them, only fear. The kind that comes when someone realizes the ground beneath them is no longer solid. "You planned this," he hissed at me. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The truth had a way of standing on its own. Mrs. Harrington motioned for me to come in. The study smelled of old books and polished wood. A place where decisions were made, quietly but carried. Consequences that lasted lifetimes. "I've reviewed everything," she said, folding her hands. "The messages, the timelines, the lies." She turned to Daniel. "You didn't just betray her. You disgraced this family." Daniel laughed bitterly. "So what? You're choosing her over your own son?" Her gaze didn't waver. "I'm choosing integrity over blood." The words landed like thunder. She continued, "Effective immediately, you will step down from the company. Your shares will be transferred into a trust, one you will not control." Daniel went pale. "You can't!" "I can, and I am." Then she turned to me. "I want you to take his place." The room went silent. I felt the world tilt, not from fear, but from disbelief. "Mrs. Harrington, I never asked for this." "I know," she replied softly. "That's why you deserve it." Daniel stormed out, the door slamming behind him. But the sound felt distant, like the echo of a chapter finally closing. Later that night, I stood alone on the balcony, city lights stretching endlessly below. I wasn't celebrating. I was breathing. For the first time in months, I wasn't the woman who had been left behind. I was the woman who had been chosen, and somewhere deep inside, I understood this wasn't revenge. This was justice. Chapter 5. The Choice That Changed Everything. By the time spring arrived, the truth no longer whispered. It stood in the open. Ethan's mother, Margaret, invited me to her lakeside home under the excuse of tea. I almost declined. Every meeting with her son's family reopened wounds I had worked hard to stitch shut. But something in her voice, steady, resolved, told me this was not about memories. It was about decisions. The house felt different that afternoon, lighter, as if the walls themselves had exhaled after years of holding secrets. "I know everything," Margaret said after we sat down. No hesitation, no denial. "He cheated, he lied. He blamed you." I didn't answer. I had learned that silence sometimes speaks louder than survival instincts. "He thinks money fixes betrayal," she continued. "That charm excuses abandonment. But character is what remains when love is tested." Her hands trembled slightly as she slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents, property transfers, company shares, legal trusts. My name appeared where his once had. "I'm stepping down from the family foundation," she said. "And I'm choosing you." The words felt unreal. "Not as revenge," she added quickly. "As justice." I finally looked up. "Why me?" Margaret met my eyes, unwavering. "Because when he walked away, you stayed honest. When he lied, you healed quietly. When he destroyed, you rebuilt yourself." That night, the city buzzed with rumors. Ethan had found out. He stormed into the foundation office the next morning, shouting, demanding, threatening lawsuits. But the board stood firm. Margaret stood firmer, and I stood beside her, not behind. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. "You're doing this to hurt me," he hissed when we crossed paths. "No," I said calmly. "You did that yourself." Weeks later, the press published the story. Family heir loses control. After years of mismanagement, founder transfers power. Ethan disappeared from public view. Margaret invited me to dinner again. This time not as a guest, but as family. "You don't owe me loyalty," she said gently. "Only truth." And for the first time since the betrayal, I felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Not revenge, relief. I walked home that night under streetlights glowing like quiet witnesses. I wasn't chosen to replace him. I was chosen because I never tried to. And somewhere deep inside I knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was the moment everything finally turned in my favor. Chapter 6. The Choice That Changed Everything. The day of the truth arrived quietly without thunder or dramatic announcements. It was a soft winter morning, the kind where the sky looked pale and undecided, as if even the weather was holding its breath. I stood in the kitchen of Mrs. Carter's house, his mother's house, holding a warm mug of tea. I hadn't touched. My hands were steady now. Months ago, they would have been shaking. She sat across from me, her fingers wrapped around her own cup, eyes heavy with a truth she had carried far too long. "He came last night," she said softly. "I didn't ask who. I already knew. He wanted money, forgiveness, another chance." She let out a slow breath. I told him no. That word, no, felt heavier than any apology I had ever waited for. She looked at me then, really looked at me. "Do you know why I chose you?" I swallowed. "Because I stayed?" She shook her head gently. "Because when he left, you didn't become cruel. You didn't destroy yourself. You became stronger and kinder. That's something he never learned." Later that day we met him, not by accident, by decision. He stood in the driveway, hands in his coat pockets, posture stiff like a boy pretending to be a man. When he saw me, something flickered in his eyes. Regret, fear, maybe shame. "Mom," he started. Then his eyes moved to me. I didn't expect her. Mrs. Carter stepped forward. Her voice was calm, controlled, final. "You abandoned love when it became inconvenient," she said. "She stayed loyal even after you broke her. That tells me everything I need to know." He turned to me, searching for something. Anger, tears, weakness. I gave him none. "I forgive you," I said quietly. "But I won't return to what hurt me." That was the moment he lost. Not because he was rejected, but because he was irrelevant. That night I stood alone on the balcony, city lights blinking softly in the distance. For the first time, I didn't feel like someone chosen instead of him. I felt chosen for myself. Chapter 7. The Choice That Changed Everything. The courthouse steps were quiet in the early morning, washed in pale sunlight after a night of rain. I stood there alone for a moment, breathing in the calm, feeling the strange weightlessness that comes when a long storm finally passes. For years, my life had been defined by him, his betrayal, his abandonment, and the shadow he cast over my past. But today, for the first time, my future felt like it belonged to me. Inside the building, the final documents rested neatly in a folder. Closure doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it comes as clean paper and steady ink. I signed my name without hesitation. The woman who had been hurt, discarded, and doubted was gone. In her place stood someone who had survived and learned to choose herself. When I stepped back outside, I saw her waiting, his mother. She wasn't there to rescue me anymore. She was there because she wanted to be. Over time, our bond had grown into something unexpected and genuine. She had chosen truth over blood, accountability over denial. She had chosen me when it would have been easier to look away. "I'm proud of you," she said softly. I nodded, emotion tightening my throat. "I'm proud of me too." We walked together for a while, not speaking much. There was nothing left to explain. The past had been faced. The lies had been named. The betrayal had lost its power. Later that evening, I returned to my apartment, the one I'd rebuilt piece by piece. The walls held no echoes of arguments anymore. Instead, they reflected warm light, steady music, and the quiet confidence of someone who knows her worth. I opened the window and let the city breathe with me. My phone buzzed once, a message from an unknown number. I didn't open it. Some stories don't need a reply. I turned away, poured a cup of tea, and sat by the window, watching the lights come on across the skyline. Tomorrow would bring new choices, new risks, and maybe even new love. But none of it would come from pain or revenge. This time, I would choose peace, and that was the most unexpected ending of all.